Hey, Business 150, Introduction to Management. This is now video number 4 in this module looking at the topic of organizing. And as you can see in this particular video, we are looking at the title of Authority and Responsibility. These are two very, very important principles, the foundational principles of organizing, job design, job specialization, what we're trying to accomplish. And one of the ways that you get people to work together is by clearly establishing lines of authority and responsibility. So, we hope that after this video, you'll be able to determine and discuss the relationships and the differences between authority and responsibility. So, when we talk about authority or authority relationships, what we're really talking about is determining who has authority, formal authority over others. Usually, these authority relationships flow down clearly from an organizational chart, right? We mentioned that in the previous video, that you can see graphically how you intend for higher positions in the organization to have authority over lower levels in the organization, and therefore to have an orderly and a systematized, structured way for authority relationships to trickle down throughout the organization. One major purpose of establishing authority relationships is to make it easier for the organization to achieve its goals, to have a chain of command. Now, the challenge, what I put here in the last bullet point, is not in the textbook, but in reality, in actual organizations, the practical challenge as a manager, and this is my challenge to you. The challenge is to keep authority relationships healthy, to have two things going on at the same time, to protect the premise that authority is to be respected and honored, while at the very same time protecting and respecting the principle that every employee should always be treated with dignity and intrinsic worth and respect. These are difficult things to keep running at the same time because, quite frankly, managers are people. And not every manager has a great comprehensive handle on understanding how to practically keep these two principles respected at the same time. And so you will run into some managers on occasion who are really overblown in their exercise of authority and damage employees in terms of not treating them with dignity and respect while lording over the power they have granted to them by the organization. You may have worked, or may even right now currently working for someone who exercises and wields their authority in ways that are not really treating every employee with dignity. And on the other hand, you can also have managers who are so focused upon treating employees with dignity and intrinsic worth that they've gotten to the point where their authority isn't respected and honored, and the employees don't really treat them with any kind of respect, and that's as unhealthy for the organization as the first example. And so keeping these things in balance is not easy, and it takes mature adults in all the roles in the organization. And of course, you hope for that, and sometimes people may disappoint you or challenge you. So this is a very real challenge when we talk about the whole topic of authority relationships. Now, we do want to draw the distinction and the difference between authority and responsibility, as well as how these things are related. Authority we can define as the right to give work orders to all who are directly connected in lower positions in the organization. If the org chart says that they report to you, you have the legitimate authority to give them work orders. Responsibility then, contrasted with the concept of authority, responsibility refers then to the accountability of an individual or a group, the responsibility that's given for the attainment of goals. Authority says, I'm giving this task to you to complete. Responsibility says, then that individual or group is now responsible to attain those goals. And the only way this works is for authority to accompany responsibility and responsibility to accompany authority as complementary and reciprocal. But I would tell you in your career a point that we sometimes make. On a personal level, if you are a manager, never accept responsibility for something that you do not have authority over or the power to influence or change. Now, let me see if I can give you an illustration of this principle. I have a good friend who at one time was a little frustrated because he was the sales manager in his organization, which means that he has authority oversight over the salespeople. What do salespeople generate for an organization? Well, they generate sales. They generate revenue. And of course, you remember from our very, very first week together in this class, what is the profit equation? The profit equation is what? Revenue minus expenses. Well, the reason my friend was a little frustrated was he told me, I got to renegotiate my compensation package. They have proposed a new way of figuring out my bonus. They want to tie bonus to divisional profitability. And I just can't have that. And at first time he mentioned it, I said, no, you can't have that. Refuse to accept that. You cannot accept that your compensation is going to be tied to things that you don't have control over. Now, think about this for a moment if that sentence catches you by surprise. Wait a minute, he's a sales manager. You're right. What does a sales manager have direct influence over? Profitability? No. Revenue. Right? Because he can work with his salespeople, manage his salespeople, empower his salespeople, motivate, compel his salespeople to bring in more revenue. But as the sales manager, he has no control, responsibility, authority, power to really affect the expense side of the company's equation, right? That's not what sales departments do. That's up to operations and other people who spend money, right? Marketing, operations, those kinds of folks, right? And therefore, don't allow your compensation to be tied to a number that you do not have direct control over, because some other department may just explode their costs upwards and that affects your bonus. You should only allow yourself to accept responsibility for something you have authority over or the power to influence or change. I hope that makes that principle clear. You should watch out for that in your career and in your job and your ongoing growth and responsibilities. So, when we talk about authority relationships are partly defined by the type of departmentalization that your organization uses. Think about this for a moment. If the way that your org charts are built by your company primarily segregate jobs together in departments based upon product type, that's different than grouping your organization together in departments based upon function. Think about this for a moment. If you basically produce two main products, one product for instance, for consumers, another product for businesses, and that's the way the big divisions in your company work. You have the consumer departments, and then you have the business product departments. That will define authority relationships. Versus if you departmentalize, you segregate your jobs in departments based upon function. For instance, you have the marketing department and the sales department and the operations department. That will have a different set of authority relationships, right? Now, another thing that has some influence upon the nature of your authority relationships is what we call the span of control. What is that? That refers to the actual physical number of subordinates over which a position has authority. You may have a manager with a wide span of control. What does that mean? That he has many subordinates reporting to them. Maybe he has 5, 10, 13 different employees all reporting to him. He has a wide span of control. Versus a manager with a narrow span of control. Maybe you have a manager, he has only 2 people actually reporting directly to him. That will also have a different set of implications on the actual authority relationships. And finally, chain of command is something we have to keep in mind when we talk about authority relationships. The chain of command ensures that all positions are directly linked in some way to top management. And that's really breaks down into 2 different principles. One principle is called the unity of command. What does unity of command refer to? It refers to the principle that when you develop your authority relationships, your org chart, that every single person in the organization has one and only one boss. Imagine how chaotic it would be if the way that someone developed the org chart, you actually had two different bosses, each of which had reporting authority over you. Well, if on Monday, boss 1 tells you to do this, and then on Tuesday, boss 2 tells you something different, who are you supposed to obey, right? So unity of command is a principle that ensures every employee has one and only one boss. But the other principle in developing your chain of command is the scalar chain. What does that mean? The scalar chain principle says that you should be able to put your finger anywhere on an org chart, and you can follow with your finger an unbroken chain of authority all the way from the top all the way down to the bottom. Why is that important? So that you know that there isn't someone who's completely disconnected from the organization who either doesn't know who they report to, or there's no way for the top to really influence that particular person or that division in an organization. So here are the examples from the textbook. You can see there figure 8.3 in your text. An example of a broad span of control. That particular supervisor has 5 different employees who reports to him, versus the narrow span of control on the right. That particular supervisor only has 2 employees reporting to him, but each of those employees has other employees below them. 2 different ways to accomplish a chain of authority, a chain of command, each with its own set of advantages and disadvantages, as you might guess. But one of the clear things that comes out as an implication, a consequence of a broad versus a narrow span of control. Consider this. If you're the supervisor on the left and you have 5 different employees reporting to you, how much discretionary time do you have in your week to tend to your own things when you've got 5 different employees who might at any point in time knock on your door and need your attention and supervision? Compare that to the supervisor on the right, who only has 2 employees reporting to them, and they have employees reporting to them, and therefore they have a measure of authority and independence granted to them, right? In that particular case, you manage fewer people, you have more discretionary time to tend to other tasks besides the direct supervision of employees. And that's one of the things that naturally comes out when you decide your organization will have a broad span of control or a narrow span of control. That's one of the consequences. And there are others, of course. You can think about those, more about that in the textbook as well. Therefore, with this brief look at the concept of authority and responsibility, we hope that you can now a little more intelligently discuss and determine the relationships, how the similarities and differences between this concept of authority and responsibility in the organization. Well, I hope that's helpful as we continue to look at the functional, practical working of organization in a company. We'll see you in the next lecture.